Hi, my name is April and welcome back to High Fantasy Writing. So today, as you might have noticed, we are going to be talking about writing advice and how to tell if writing advice is actually any good. So as we all know, there is a ton of writing advice out here on the internet, in the real world, from AuthorTube to Pinterest, to books written about writing, to classes on creative writing. And so, with all of these super accessible ways to get writing advice, how can you actually tell if it's good writing advice or if it's somebody just shooting off because they really feel like shooting off that day? So, that's what this video is going to be about, how you can figure out whether or not writing advice is good for you, specifically if it's good for your story. Now, writing advice can come from authors themselves, published authors, I know, do a lot about how they write, or it could be just random people on the internet who have written a couple short stories and to feel like they have some advice to give. Writing is incredibly subjective. So, what one person likes in their writing is going to be completely different from what another person likes. The styles, the genres, the plot structures are all going to be different for different people because of their preferences. So, finding writing advice that's specific to you and your story and making sure that the writing advice given is actually applicable to you can be a little bit difficult to do. So if you're looking for writing advice, that's amazing. That means that you know that you don't know everything there is to know about writing and that you're looking to grow in your craft. You want to be able to write better and better and better, and you're actively seeking out ways to do that. You're listening to other people who might have more experience than you, and you're willing to take in and change things about your writing, which some people are unwilling to do. Ignoring any and all writing advice that comes your way can be very stagnating to your writing, and you're not going to be able to grow in the ways that you want to because you're focused on your work and thinking that you know best and that everybody else is just trying to cut your creativity and different things like that, which may be the case in some areas. So that's why I'm here to let you know how to figure out good writing advice from bad writing advice. So instead of holing up in your own personal writing bubble, you can open your mind to different writing advice and to know that some might work for you while others it is okay to reject some writing advice. So, being a new writer and searching out writing advice is really great, but it can also lead you to underestimate your own writing instincts and have the automatic assumption that everybody who you're seeing advice from just must know better than you and that you have to accept everything that they're telling you to do. A lot of writing advice comes with the tag of, if you can't take writing advice, you're a bad writer, you're immature, you need to get a thicker skin because that's what writing is. Everybody's giving you critiques, everybody's going to reject you, and you just need to get used to it and take writing advice and just suck it up. Now, sometimes, in some cases, that can be pretty good advice, give you that kick in the pants to be like, hey, you don't know everything. But it can also lead you to start accepting a lot of really bad advice because you're afraid to critique it. You're afraid to analyze it and see if it actually is good writing advice because you don't want to seem like you know best and that you're rejecting all advice that comes your way. I know that I did this when I got started into writing. I didn't know a whole bunch about creative writing, and so I was wanting to become better, and everyone was saying, you've got to take this advice. You've got to just be accepting of changing your writing style. And so I did, or I thought about doing it a lot. Thankfully, I didn't in some cases, and thankfully, I did in others. But I know that I took in a lot of really bad writing advice, and it actually, I feel like, hurt me mentally as a writer because it sowed a lot of self-doubt in my own capabilities. And everybody, I believe, has an innate artistic side to them, and they have their own innate styles that they prefer and that they really excel at. And having a bunch of people tell you, no, this is the style you need to do, can be a bit harmful to your actual writing progress. So this video is to help you not be like I was when I first started looking at writing advice and just taking everything that comes your way, but rather I want you to be able to look at and analyze the writing advice you see and determine whether or not it's good advice or bad advice, and whether or not it actually applies to your story. So here are some general things to keep in mind about advice before I get into the specifics. So traditional publishing is going to be much more strict in what they will accept to be published and what they won't. So you might need to really cut your creativity in some aspects if what you want to do is outside of the norm for publishing at that particular time. Self-publishing will give you a lot more freedom to try out new things, go against the trends that are currently going on, or stand out in a trend that's already happening and that some people might say is already being overdone. This is also true about story structure. So some publishers might balk at publishing a story that doesn't fit in the story structures that are popular at the time. If you want to try out something different, something that's an extremely slow burn, maybe it is literally just a day in the life type of story, traditional publishing might not accept that, but self-publishing will. So advice, looking for advice depends on whether or not you want to self-publish or traditionally publish. And there's a lot of great advice out there if you are wanting to traditionally publish. But if that advice feels like it's restricting to you because you have to please some bigwig at a publishing agency, then maybe take a step back and think, maybe I want to self-publish then. Maybe this writing advice is just really not helping me out in writing my story, and I need to think about self-publishing. Also, kind of in line with that, genre-specific advice is a lot more helpful than super general writing advice a lot of the times. So thrillers are going to be extremely different from fantasy, which are going to be extremely different from contemporary, which are going to be extremely different from a historical biography or a alternative historical biography. So all of those different genres are going to have different styles, different plot structures, different tropes, different character archetypes within them. And so seeking out advice specific to the story that you're writing is really going to help you out a lot more than the big generalized advice, the big 10 things never to do in your writing, 10 things to always do in your writing. Those types of videos might not be as helpful as you really think that they might be going into them. Knowing the story that you're writing and how you want the reader to feel as they're reading your writing is really important in looking at advice and telling if it is good advice for you. So what feelings do you want to evoke with your writing? Do you want the reader to be right there in your main character's head? Or do you want them to feel very distanced, like somebody is telling them a story in a grand epic way? So you're not in the dirt right next to the MC. You're not feeling the sweat dripping down their face, feeling their stomach tighten as they face down a dragon. Maybe you want to be removed. Maybe you want to be the grand, omniscient narrator and have that be the vibe of your story. Those two different vibes are going to get very different advice given to them on how you can achieve that vibe you're going for with your story. And keep in mind, a lot of the big tens to get out of your writing, things like that, are actually telling you to get rid of incredibly powerful writing tools in your arsenal that make your story stand out, that make different scenes in your story stand out. So passive voice is a big one. It's an artistic writing tool that can be used to amazing effect in your writing if you want to evoke a specific feeling in your writing. If you want your protagonist to feel like the story is happening to them in a particular scene, passive voice can be great for that. So whenever somebody gives you advice to get rid of X, Y, or Z thing, always keep in mind that these are all tools in writing that are existing for a reason. So maybe in your story, that tool is actually going to come in handy and you don't want to fully get rid of that. And one last thing to keep in mind is that just because a piece of writing advice is super, super popular does not mean that it is good writing advice. Sometimes people see a piece of writing advice, maybe a quote on Pinterest, with a very pretty aesthetic background, and they think, oh wow, that sounds really cool. That's a pretty background. I'm going to now regurgitate that advice. Not analyze it at all, not add anything to it, just regurgitate said advice. And then somebody else sees that and they're like, oh, this person is saying that, so let me regurgitate it. And then another person says, well, I've seen 3 people now that have said the same thing, so I'm going to regurgitate it. And then soon 100 people are saying the exact same thing, but it doesn't mean it's good advice. This is especially common with writing routine advice and with things like tropes to avoid advice. So a big one is you have to write every single day. If you don't write every single day, then you're not actually trying. You don't actually want to be a writer. So you just have to force yourself to write, because if you don't write every day, you're just making excuses. You're a bad writer. That's a piece of advice that I see a lot and that I personally find to be extremely bad advice. I could go into a whole video about why just writing every day is absolutely necessary to your writing growth, and how that's completely inaccurate and actually a pretty toxic mindset and can lead to a lot of stagnation and self-doubt and a lot of bad mental things, as well as just in general your life. Sometimes you literally don't have time to write. And anybody who tells you that, yes, you do have time to write every single day, you're just making excuses, they're extremely privileged and are incapable of understanding a life outside of their own, and that other people in other life circumstances, they don't have the privileges that person giving that bit of advice has. So I could go off on a tangent about that, but that's not what this video is about. It was just an example for you to kind of be able to kickstart and think, oh, okay, yeah, I've seen that advice. And that's the type of advice I'm talking about. Another thing it happens with is things like tropes to avoid, like love triangles, the damsel in distress, tropes like that a whole bunch of writing advice will tell you 10 tropes to always avoid is X tropes, when that's actually not the greatest advice, because every single trope can be done well. Just because it's been done poorly 100 times before doesn't mean that you aren't going to be the one who has a new way to look at it and who really makes it stand out and makes it a good trope. So any writing advice that tells you stay away from these tropes, take a look at it. Even though it's a very popular piece of advice, doesn't mean it's good. All right, so with all of that in mind, let's get down to how you can tell if writing advice is actually any good and if it's applicable to your work. So the first thing to look out for is if the advice is just a stylistic preference. Many people fall into treating their own preferred writing style as the best style to write in or the only good style to write in, And if you write in a different style, then it's just bad writing. Now, this is obviously not true, but it can lead to a lot of self-doubt when you look at your own writing and think, oh, well, that person really likes huge, big world building with every single country already having a whole history written out that the author knows, and there are 15 different political groups in each town, and they're woven into the story. And while I don't have that in mine, mine's more simple world building. It's closer to the character and what the character might know. And so you don't get that bigger picture. So is my writing bad? No, it's not. That person just prefers a huge world building style. That's personally a style that I really like to read, but I'm not so good at writing. So trying to say that what you prefer reading is what everybody should be writing is just bad advice. Everybody has their own stylistic preferences, and what one person loves, another person could hate. Trying to please everybody with a single style is never going to happen. So if the advice you're getting is very stylistically based, it's not good advice. This can also come in the form of them saying what modern readers want. And so they think that for some reason, modern readers are a monolith. Everyone wants the exact same thing in their story. And that is simply not the case. It has become a very popular trend to have very graphic sex scenes and violence scenes in stories, in television shows, things like that. It's become very popular to have those types of things. That does not mean that you have to have those in your writing. Some people might give you the advice that if you don't have a graphic sex scene between your characters, if you, God forbid, fade to black during a sex scene, then it's a boring story. It's bad. You're antiquated in your writing style. You're afraid of sex, and so how dare you? And it's like, no, that might just not be your style. That might not be important to your story, the exact mechanics of the sex these two characters are having. That might not be a big thing in your story, and you might not feel like you need to include that. And just because it's very popular at the time, and people are saying that's what readers are wanting now, is the grittier, I want to see insert graphic violent thing here that I'm not comfortable with, then it's bad and people aren't going to like your work, so you need to make it grittier. That's all based on stylistic preferences. So if you see a bit of advice like that, keep in mind that that's just what they prefer. That's not what everyone who is going to be reading your story prefers. So Tolkien is a really great example of a writing style that pretty much most people agree that he is an incredible writer, and his writing style is very unique and specific to the type of stories that he tells. Many people today will tell you that Tolkien's writing style is inaccessible to the modern reader, and that nobody likes reading all of those descriptions and those heavy histories. Like, he will start a description and then pause at a statue and go on a huge 5-paragraph history of that one statue. Now, some people don't like that. I personally think it adds a lot to the story because it is very unique and specific, and you know you're reading Tolkien when you're reading Tolkien. And I think that that's a good thing. I enjoy hearing all of those histories. I enjoy the song breaks in The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. I loved The Silmarillion. These are all stylistic preferences that different people are going to feel differently about. Just because some people don't like Tolkien's style of writing doesn't mean you shouldn't try to emulate some of his stylistic techniques. It doesn't mean trying to pay homage to the greats like Tolkien or C.S. Lewis would be a bad thing for you to do. It's absolutely okay to take a look at an older style of writing and say that really resonates with me, and I want to kind of write like that, even if that's not what's popular at the time. Even if people say stylistically that's bad. There's really no such thing. It's all personal taste. The next thing to watch out for is people who want you to stick to a very specific formula for writing. They have very strict do's and don'ts. They have very strict story structures that you need to follow, that have very specific story beats that need to mean X, Y, or Z for your character. Some people feel very strongly about the hero's journey. That's the one that I see the most, is people saying that every single good story that resonates with people has to follow the hero's journey, which leads to some awkward moments where they might try to force a story to fit into this hero's journey that maybe really doesn't fit it, but they've gotten it into their heads that the hero's journey is the only way to write a good story. And if I like this story, then it must somehow fit into the hero's journey. I must make it fit. When really, there is no one way to write a fantastic story. There is no one formula that every single story has to follow in order to be good. That's ridiculous. This again can cause a lot of doubt when you look at your story and think, well, my story doesn't follow that formula. Does that mean it's automatically bad? No, it does not mean that your story is automatically bad because it does not follow beat for beat the hero's journey. Many also claim that they have this secret recipe for the perfect way to structure a story, the perfect way to come up with a story, and that it takes those popular things but puts a twist on them that only they know. And if you want to know that, you can get it for the low, low price of 3 times your rent. So some people are going to claim some sort of authority over a writing structure that you must follow in order for it to be a good story. And a lot of times they're selling something. So there is absolutely nothing wrong with putting a lot of time and effort into a class, into a workbook or a worksheet about writing and some writing tips to try and help people. And after you put all that time into it, there's nothing wrong with charging somebody for that work that you've put in. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Your labor absolutely should be rewarded, and you shouldn't have to be the starving artist who never charges anyone for their work. I mean, come on, we've all got to eat, and there's nothing wrong with making a little bit of money on the side. What I do have an issue with is people who do this by charging exorbitant prices because they say that their advice is so spectacular and unique and nobody else knows this, and you've got to be in on it. And you've got to pay this huge price to be in on it. That's what I have an issue with. People who claim some sort of secret that you need to pay a lot of money to get in on, watch out for that, because it's probably not that profound of a secret. It's probably not a secret at all. So another issue with this formulaic advice is that not all books need to follow, say, this 3-act structure. They don't all need to have the exact same type of climax and intro and inciting incident and rising action that every other story has. If you stick too clearly and closely to a formula, then your story becomes, well, formulaic, and it becomes predictable, and people know exactly what's going to happen. I've had issues with that when I'm reading books. I can so clearly see the outline and I know exactly what beats are coming next. And I kind of start getting bored with the story because it's so formulaic. So don't feel like you have to follow any of these formulas in order for your writing to be good. Actually, switching it up can be so relieving to you and to a reader because the reader is going to see something they've never seen before. And so that's perfectly okay to ignore writing advice that says this is the one formula of creating a story, of plotting a story, and you've got to follow it or your story is bad. One more bit of writing advice that I see a lot, especially when you're looking at creating character advice, is that many times people giving advice are incapable of thinking about anything beyond their own life experiences. And so they begin to try to tell you that your character is unrealistic because what they're doing or the experiences that they've had in life are just, they're not realistic because I haven't experienced it like that. So nobody must have experienced it like that. This can also take the form of people thinking that characters in every single story have to have modern sensibilities, that if characters don't act the way that they do in current exact modern times, then they're bad. But always keep in mind that there is a huge diversity of looking at the world and life experiences in every single era in history, in every single place in the world. Take one small town and you're going to get a huge diversity of thought, of life experiences, of life positions and jobs and thoughts on sexuality, thoughts on male-female relationships in society, everything like that. Everyone has such a unique perspective, and that's not, you can't just say all modern people are going to think this way, because that is very clearly not the case when you look out into the world. Not everybody believes that feminism is a good thing. There are many people, women, today, who believe that women should be subservient to men. And if you have a character in your modern day contemporary who believes that, that is completely realistic. Now, you might want to take a look at making sure that not every single character feels that same way, but writing advice that tells you, no, that's not realistic for a woman in the 21st century to believe that, it's actually sadly very realistic. Another aspect of this, a specific piece of writing advice that I saw that really made me think about this, was somebody saying that any woman over the age of 16, and especially once they've hit 20, if they've lived in a social setting, it is absolutely unrealistic for that woman to be a virgin still. Literally, their advice was that women should not be virgins. And that's just bizarre to me because everyone's sexual journey is extremely different from one another. It is absolutely realistic that a 16-year-old girl, even if she has a whole bunch of guy friends and she's very comfortable with her guy friends, even if she's had boyfriends before or girlfriends before or whatever sexual circumstance she could have been in, it's still very realistic that she would never have had sex. I mean, everybody doesn't want to have sex. Everyone doesn't want to have casual sex. Everyone has different reasons as to why they do or don't have sex. I've said sex a lot. And it's not realistic to expect every single person's sexual life to be the exact same. The example that this particular person gave was Vin from the Mistborn trilogy. And this is not a spoiler for the story at all. It's you start out pretty much first chapter knowing all of this stuff about Vin. So Vin is the main character, and she's a woman, and she's a young woman. I believe she's 17 or 18 when the story starts. And this article was saying that it was just unrealistic that Vin was still a virgin. Now I understand where this critique of virginity in female characters comes from, because there have been a lot of historical tropes of the virginal damsel in distress, where the male main character gets to come in and save her and give her her first best romantic and sexual experience she's ever had, and she's the untarnished flower because sex tarnishes you, apparently. And that was a very big part of literature in a lot of areas. But it's not a bad thing to have female characters with different sexual experiences, including being a virgin. So Vin is a street urchin when we find her. She's young, she lost her family, all except for her brother. And she's always had to live with mostly male thieving gangs. And she's had to struggle to survive her entire life. And her brother has drilled in one rule into her head. Everyone will betray you. You can't trust anyone. And so far in her life, that has been true. Everybody has treated her terribly. And so the idea that this character who has had to struggle to survive, who doesn't trust anyone, who's forced to live with these men in the thieving gang, not by choice, but by life circumstance, to think that she might not want to have sex with these people is just strange to me. Why would she want to have sex with them? Why would she feel comfortable with that? Just because a female character is a virgin does not mean she's repressing herself. It just may be life circumstances. There are plenty of reasons why women, because this article was specifically saying women who are virgin, that's a bad thing to write. Women have so many reasons why they may or may not have sex. Some might be religious, some might be life circumstance, some might be just a personal choice, some might be the opportunity has never arisen to have sex with a person that they want to have sex with. So just to say a blanket statement, because this character is a female, she's got to have had sex before in her life. It's just ridiculous, and it's bad advice, and it's not going to help you write your female characters in a more realistic and genuine way to try and fit them all into this modern sensibility of women are not sexually repressed creatures, therefore they must always be having sex. One last bit of advice that I want to talk about to take a look at and see if it's really applicable to you is advice that hinges on the idea that you want to be a wild success in the publishing industry, that you are writing this book solely to get it published and to be on the New York Times bestseller list. Not everybody wants that, and nobody can give you a perfect formula to always hit bestseller every single time. Nobody can even give you a formula to get published every time. Nobody can give you a formula to get through your querying process every time. It just doesn't exist. So anybody who's telling you that this is how you can always get published is lying, or see before, trying to sell you something. And so this advice sometimes leads you to try and fit yourself into a box that you might not want to fit in. So it's absolutely okay to take a look at that advice and say, you know what, that's geared towards people who really want to traditionally publish. I don't feel comfortable changing my story in that way. So I'm going to take a step back and say, no, I'm going to be writing my story the way I want to write my story. So in conclusion, it is 100% okay to not take every bit of advice that comes your way. It is 100% good to critically analyze the writing advice that you're seeing and figure out whether or not it's one, even good advice, and two, if it even applies to your story. It might be great advice for somebody writing, I don't know, a YA fantasy, but it's not very good advice for somebody who's trying to write a contemporary. I mean, advice is not a one size fit all thing. It's okay to look at advice and say, that's not for me. You are not spitting in the face of the person giving that advice. You are not insulting them. You are not saying, well, I know how to write everything better than that person. But you do know your story better than they do. And it's okay to admit that. And it's absolutely okay to say no to some advice. You aren't being stubborn. You aren't being thin-skinned. You're not thinking that you know best. You're just doing what's best for you and having the inner strength to be able to stand up and say, hey, I'm not a terrible person for rejecting some writing advice. I'm going to look at it critically and I'm going to make up my own mind about this. And that's a good thing. That's not a bad thing at all. So just keep in mind, there is no one right way to write a book. There is no one right way to form a story. There's no one perfect character that needs to be in every story. And there's no one right way to impact an audience and make them really have that change, that eureka moment that so many books give us when we see something presented in a totally unique way and that really, really touches us and changes our lives. Writing is art, and art is subjective. So every bit of writing advice is not going to help your art be the art that it needs to be. And that's absolutely okay, because we're all diverse, we're all different, we all are impacted by different things. And that's the beauty of so many people now having access to self-publishing, to publishing on blogs, to sharing their stories on YouTube and places like Tumblr, and even Twitter threads. It can be a great way to get a story out, a unique way to tell a story. It's all right here for us. And don't ever feel like you have to fit yourself into a box that you just don't want to fit in. It's okay. And you can still write an incredible story while rejecting some writing advice that just doesn't benefit you. So I hope that this video was really helpful to you. I know that I really needed to hear some of these things when I was first getting serious into writing and looking at all these different writing advices and maybe taking a few pieces of advice that I shouldn't have taken, that now thankfully I've realized maybe they don't really apply to me all that much. And I hope that it's given you a couple of tools where when you see a piece of writing advice, you can be able to look at it and think, does this really apply to me? And so I hope that that would be helpful to you as you're trying to get better at writing. So again, my name is April, this is High Fantasy Writing, and I'm so glad that you decided to take the time to click on this video and take a look at it. If you did find it really helpful, you can leave a like button so that other people can see it more on YouTube, because that's kind of how YouTube recommends things to people, if they've liked it and stuff like that. If they've commented under it, YouTube kind of knows, okay, so people liked this, so here's it for other people recommended to them. So if you do feel so inclined to share it with somebody, to give it a like, or comment down below what pieces of writing advice that you have found to be extremely helpful and what writing advice you haven't found to be very helpful. Of course, if you want to see me talk about another topic, you can leave that in the description down below as well. Thank you again so much for coming and listening to me kind of ramble on about different writing advice topics. and I do intend on publishing a couple more videos. I'm looking at 2 a month right now. I'm currently editing my one on how to be a critique partner, specifically how to put the right foot forward when you're critiquing somebody's work. So if they sent you their first chapter, kind of some things to keep in mind as a critique partner to set off on the right foot with the author that you're partnering with. So I do hope to see you back for that one. And as you can see, it is fall time here. I believe this is going to go up right a couple of days before Samhain. So I do hope that you have a wonderful, blessed Samhain or Halloween or All Hallows Eve or Dia de los Muertos, whatever you celebrate. I hope that all the energies of the season combine to make your writing the best that it can be. So thank you so much for stopping by, and have a good rest of your day.